A couple of weeks before Halloween last year, my wife and I had some friends over. I don't remember who started it now, but after several beers, we all began sharing scary stories with each other. They were all supposed to be true. I don't know how many were. They ranged from stories about toilets flushing on their own, to someone who claimed to have seen their grandfather's ghost standing at the foot of their bed one morning. I told a story about hearing a door slam shut in my parents' house, but never being able to determine where it came from. We're all nearly 30 now, so none of this stuff was scaring anyone, but we were drunk and having a good time. One story did scare me, though. I think it unsettled most of us. I'd been friends with Josh for almost 15 years. I'd been concerned about him for a while, but what he told us that night scared me. I told my wife after he left that I should see about getting him some help. She said that he was just drunk and kidding around. I don't know if I believed that. I kept meaning to set something up for him. I didn't talk to Josh for a long time after that. But honestly, I was embarrassed for him. He'd really fallen apart in the last 6 or 7 years. He'd put on a lot of weight, developed a pretty bad dependency on various pills, Xanax, Vicodin, whatever he could get his hands on, and become reclusive. At one point, he'd had a pretty bright future ahead of him. He came from a rich family, but he was still a hardworking guy. He was smart and funny. He was going to a prestigious college, but he dropped out his senior year. He got into drugs, his mom died, and a whole bunch of other stuff. He got arrested a couple of times, but I'm not sure what for. He couldn't hold down a job. In fact, a few days before he came over to our house that night, his car had been repossessed. About 3 months ago, Josh took a bunch of muscle relaxers and I'm not sure what else. He was still alive when they found him. He died the next day. When I visited him in the hospital, he was really out of it. It was the first time I'd seen him since last October. I felt pretty guilty, but I didn't tell him that. I don't know that he even would have understood it. It didn't seem like he was aware of what was going on. I wish that I had done something to help him earlier, but I didn't know what to do. And I guess I was just too busy to be a decent friend. I told him I was sorry. He turned away from me and mumbled something a few times. It sounded like covered in shame, or covered in his shame, or covered in his shape. The story he told that night last October was a big warning sign. I don't know if it was schizophrenia or that the drug use had fried his brain or what, but something was wrong. His story was about how a void had entered him one night, and ever since then his brain or soul was corrupted. I thought he was joking at first, and so did everyone else. But the more he talked about it, the more I felt that he really believed the story. I'd known Josh for a long time, and I could tell that he was nervous about sharing this, but it was almost like he had to unburden himself. I don't know what the guy was going through at that time. I wish I had asked him more. But we'd grown apart after college, and sometimes it seemed like he was avoiding me. I don't know if my success made him uncomfortable, or if he felt like he'd disappointed me, or if maybe he just didn't like me anymore. All that made me reluctant to get involved. I actually remember the night that his story took place, and I can unequivocally state that no floating blind spots entered him. It was the night of Emily Robinson's going-away party. She was moving to Seattle. There was a park near Emily's apartment where we had parked our car. We left the party and walked back to our cars. It was probably a little after 2 a.m. There was a stone wall about 4 feet tall that passed down one side of the park. I'd heard that it was built during the Civil War, but someone told me that it was built in the 1930s by the WPA. I'll tell the rest as Josh told it to us that night, though it is in contradiction to my memory. Josh said that he had climbed over the wall to take a piss. I had stayed by the cars and smoked a cigarette. There was a steep slope on the other side of the stone wall. It led down to a creek maybe 10 or 15 feet below the parking area. Josh said that he'd gone down to that creek to piss, but that he'd seen something upstream from him. He described it as a dark gray light, but then said it looked more like a floating blind spot. He was frozen as soon as he saw it. When he tried to shout up to me, nothing came out. He said it just sort of floated over to him and passed right through. He gestured with his hands as if the thing had passed directly through his chest and kept moving down the creek. As he was telling this story, it made me very uncomfortable and a little scared. Like I said, I remembered that night, and it worried me that his version was so different from mine. It didn't strike me at first what was different, but I realized that he'd switched our perspectives. It was surreal to hear this warped retelling of what happened that night. His decline must have started much earlier than I thought. Josh said that after that night, he knew that something inside of him had changed. He said that thing had left something inside him, or maybe taken something out. He wasn't sure which. He told us that even though no one else could see how he'd changed, he could see it, and that soon everyone would see it. He wished that he didn't know, but he did. There were so many weird things about his story that I didn't realize until later how odd it was that he said we couldn't see how he'd changed. If there was anything about Josh that we could all see, it was that he'd changed considerably in the last half-decade. He insisted that things were just going to get worse, and quickly. His face was full of frustration. It was like there was so much more he wanted to tell us, but didn't know how. Or maybe he could tell we didn't believe it. I should have done something after that night. He was delusional and distressed. I let him down. He left a note when he died. He said that he would miss us, but he was glad to be gone. He said that he was sorry, but he couldn't face what was coming. I try to find some peace in that. Still, I can't pretend that I'm blameless. By the end, I'd known for nearly a year that he was completely insane. I should have told him that night last October that he wasn't even the one that jumped over that stone wall. I knew his story wasn't true. I'd gone down to the creek to piss. He'd stayed by the cars to smoke. I remember that specifically because I saw something that looked like a mini ball bullet like they used in the Civil War while I was pissing. My dad had bought me one when I was a kid. I picked it up and looked at it closer. It turned out to just be a smooth, oblong rock with some small grooves etched in it. But I kept it anyways. I've still got it today. It wasn't long ago I noticed a strange noise coming from the air conditioning unit in the wall of the living room. It started out as a slight clanking sound, only when it was first turned on. I had just attributed it to the age of the apartments and the appliances within. Realistically, they weren't all that old in the grand scheme of things. But without constant upkeep, things break down and fall apart relatively fast. Everything in the place made at least some kind of noise. The washing machine shook, the dishwasher sounded like a jet taking off, and the fridge would kick on every few minutes and hum so loudly I'd have to turn the television up to hear anything over it. So you can see how it wasn't such a big deal for the air conditioner to rattle a little. So I put it to the back of my mind as just something that comes with age. That was, until it started making it more and more often. I first noticed it when I turned it on and the rattling didn't just go away after a second or two. I had better tell the landlord so maintenance can come fix this, I thought. After about a minute, it once again stopped, and the thought faded into memory. A few weeks passed, and I began to notice other strange occurrences. Scratching in the walls, the electricity flickering in and out, the occasional thump in the night. Again, things that could all happen due to the age of the wiring. Maybe a mouse had gotten into the walls, or a noisy new neighbor had moved in. All pretty explainable, I thought. Besides, I worked a lot and really didn't have a lot of free time to do much, so it didn't bother me. But when things started to go missing in my tiny one-bedroom apartment, I started to worry. I hadn't been home in what felt like a couple of weeks. Between work and friends, I was barely there at all besides to sleep and bathe. I figured I should do a thorough search of the place and see where my things could have gone. The TV remote, a calculator, several pairs of socks, and one shoe were apparently misplaced. So I went through room to room, which was really only 4 rooms, searching high and low to find my things. As I did this, I noticed more and more small, ineffectual things were also missing. Strange, I thought. Where could these things have gone? I hit the power button on the TV and sat down in my once familiar armchair, now a stranger in my own forgotten home, and noticed something. The TV wasn't on. I flipped the light switch up and down, but nothing. Oh, for God's sake, this is getting ridiculous. I got up and twisted the knob on the stereo. Nothing. I went around and tested all the appliances to see if they were all still functioning. To no avail, as not a thing in the place was still working. Except, strangely enough, the increasingly loud air conditioner. It came on with a loud rattle, and ran that way for several minutes, until it sparked. I heard a loud pop, and it too died. Maybe the power's out and it'll be fine in the morning, I thought, half-heartedly. I had a hard time sleeping that night. The neighbors were especially loud, and being without power made me nervous. I woke up the next morning to find that the power was still out. I took a shower, got dressed, and went over to my neighbors to ask if they were having similar problems. I knocked loudly several times, but no answer. I decided enough was enough and went to the maintenance office to complain and hopefully resolve the issue. When I opened the door, the smell of stale smoke swept into my nostrils. The place was a mess. Papers and ashes all about the desk, peeling paint and smudges on the windows, and a TV with only static bolted to the wall. Sitting behind the desk was a thin, graying man who looked as if he hadn't bathed in a week. I told him about how everything was suddenly not working but the AC unit, until it sputtered its last. He gave me a sarcastic look, and with a gruff, he grabbed his toolbox and followed me back to my apartment. You see, I would have called, but for some reason, nothing seems to be working. I don't think the electricity is out because the air conditioner was running and suddenly died. Well, let's take a look at it, he said. He went over to it and unscrewed the faceplate and peered inside. He clicked his flashlight on and went to work unscrewing and checking different things, when he stopped suddenly and pulled out a tiny thing attached to a cord that didn't look like it belonged. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "This yours?" I couldn't even identify what he was holding. "I don't believe so. What is it?" "It's one of those little spy cameras. You haven't been having girls over, secretly taping them, have you?" He gave a sly grin. "No! What was that doing in my home?" I was getting scared, and a little irate. He shrugged. "Well, let's see where this wire goes, huh?" He followed the wire with his hand and stopped to look inside. There's a little hole in here. It goes into the wall. He pulled out his hammer and got to taking chunks out of the drywall and following the cord. I was freaking out. Who put that there? Was this dirty old man watching me? Are there more of those? All these thoughts went through my head as I watched him work. Well, that explains a lot, he said under his breath. What? What is it? I exclaimed. Looks like somebody rewired your outlets over here. He backed away to show me what he was seeing. But why? My guess? Stealing your power. You sure you didn't notice anything? His calmness put me on edge. I thought back to the odd noises in my walls, the thumping, the flickering lights. What had once seemed such a normal thing now had my heart racing. I noticed a few things here and there, but I haven't been here a lot lately. I thought it was just an old place. He gave me a skeptical look and continued following the ever-expanding bunch of wires and cables throughout the place. Some wires would branch off to more tiny cameras, hidden in vents and just in the shadows. One even wired into the eye of one of my pictures. How have I not noticed these? My heart had started beating faster and faster as he discovered more. He kept going and, one by one, found all my electric had been rewired into one central bunch that led to the bedroom. My heart stopped. How long have these been here? Not long, I'd say. We check all the appliances and outlets before we rent the places out. Well, where does it all lead? He kept knocking holes with his hammer and following the dreaded cables, until finally he stopped and looked into the most recent hole he had made with a flashlight. The space between the walls gets a lot bigger here. I think I can fit in here. I see something glowing just around the corner. He smashed a hole big enough for him to squeeze through and disappeared into my bedroom wall. He appeared a few seconds later, a grim look on his face, and his skin had gone pale. He was no longer the calm, apparently fearless man he was before. You aren't going to want to hear this, but there's a little room back there. Bunch of monitors set up all over, and all sorts of crap scattered around. Looks like somebody was living in there, but no sign of him now. He swallowed hard. This place is starting to freak me out. I packed my things and left for my mom's that day, not wanting to spend another second in that place. Over the next few days, the police came and investigated the whole scene. They found 20 different monitors, all linked up to VHS players in that little room in the walls. Surprisingly, though, no tapes were ever found, and neither was the thing that had been watching me all those nights. A few weeks had passed, and a box arrived on my mother's doorstep. It was unlabeled, but inside was all the little things that had gone missing in my apartment. I also found a dirty, ripped piece of paper with a barely legible message scrawled on it. I like your new place much better. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm so scared and I can't trust anyone. I went camping about 3 weeks ago in the Huntsville National Forest in Texas. Me and 3 friends that came home for the weekend. They're all in college, and usually we all get together at least once a year. Old friends from high school. For the camping trip, we plan to go backpacking deep in the forest, living off of the fish that we catch and the animals we can trap. We've been doing this for a while in Texas, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, so we're pretty much used to anything you'd encounter out there. It was my turn to pick where we went camping, so I chose Huntsville. So we drive up there, park our car in a camping spot, and start walking off into the forest. We had some laughs along the way, everyone catching up with each other's lives. We walked until it started to get dark and set up camp where we stopped. Everyone gathered wood to make a fire and we set up our tent. And we did what we always did, try and scare each other with weird stories. Around this time, we started to smell something very faint. It was noticeable, but not overbearing. We couldn't put our finger on what it was, so we just carried on. Mike had to go piss and walked off into the forest. A second later, he comes running back, piss all down his jeans like he'd missed really bad. Immediately, we all crack up and throw some jokes at him. Then we noticed he was white as snow and trying to catch his breath. He starts screaming for us to follow him and runs off. We all get serious and go follow him, not knowing what the problem was. We start to hear a faint scream and crying in the distance, in the direction we were running. It was pitch black away from the camp, and Mike had the only flashlight, so at this stage we didn't have much choice but to follow the light, which was frantically pointing here and there in front of him. The scream gets closer, and Mike starts to slow down. We then notice a ratty old cabin that looked like it was abandoned, except for a faint light that we could see from one of the old mildew-covered windows. The crying was intense. Whoever it was couldn't breathe enough to let out a full yell. We all followed Mike up to the front door, and we could all hear the crying from inside. As soon as he knocked on the door, it stopped. We all waited, and heard really heavy footsteps walking fast to the door. There was a giant slam against the door, and the sound of a bolt unlocking. Then nothing. We waited for a bit, knocked a few more times, but still nothing happened. We walked around the house. There was no way any of us were leaving each other's side, and noticed a window, which was a good way up. Alex took a deep breath and asked us to give him a boost so he could see inside. Me and Mike lifted him up to the window. We watched him brush away dirt and webs, and place his face close to try and see something. There was a quick beat. Then, suddenly, he breathed in fast and let out a loud scream. He fell back from the window, screaming bloody murder the whole way. We all tried to calm him down, but he was hysterical. We went to him, but he started to shake, punch, kick, you name it, and then took off towards the camp. None of us wanted to be separated, so we all ran close behind him. We caught up to him and grabbed him and set him down. The fire was dying out, so I grabbed some nearby wood that we collected and added it to the fire. My hands were shaking. I had to do something. I went back to Alex and we all tried to calm him down. He wouldn't. He kept screaming and was breathing so hard that he eventually fainted. All of us are terrified now, and we all kept the fire high until sunrise. Periodically, Alex kept waking up, screaming just like before. By sunrise, he was up and looked catatonic, just mumbling to himself and whimpering. Me and Mike decided to go look at the cabin now that it was daylight. We searched where we thought it was, except there was nothing there. Nothing at all. The indistinct smell from last night had now grown into a very strong smell of something dead, something stale. We headed back to the campsite. When we got there, we found that Alex had chewed into the sides of his face and swallowed so much blood that he was throwing up. John was at his back. He looked like he was about to die from exhaustion. I guess we all looked that way. I just didn't notice until I saw his face. Alex said quietly that We need to leave. Now. We all started to pack up the tent. It started to rain really heavily, and the sky started to grow really dark. Alex started to go into a panic. He went and grabbed a big stick and yelled at us to leave it and go now, or he'd knock us out and drag us out of there himself. Mike started to yell at him, and they began to fight. We broke it up and finished packing, then started to make our way back. After a little while, we arrived at a creek we had crossed the previous day, only now it was flooded over, and the water was moving too fast for us to cross it. Alex started to scream again, yelling at Mike for taking his time packing up the tent when we could have gotten out of there. This went on for a while, until we finally convinced Alex to calm down and tell us what happened. He said that as soon as he put his face to the glass, a face on the other side did the same thing and started to smile really big. It had dark eyes and a dark mouth, which was much bigger than Alex's. As the smile got as large as it could, a giant shadow behind it swung something down and sliced its face off. The face was stuck to the window, and he said it started to laugh quietly as it slid down. Mike, still pissed off and, though he wouldn't admit it, beginning to get freaked out, started to argue with him again. We eventually started to follow the creek for a way across. After a while, we started to see toys floating in the creek. Really old toys. Old Barbie and baby dolls. This wasn't like any old trash floating in the creek. One washed towards the side, and Mike picked it up. It had some kind of voice chip that was dying, and it started to say some gurgling words we couldn't understand, followed by its sad excuse for laughter. Then it sounded like it was whispering. We thought the batteries must be dying. He threw it back. We kept going, and the sun was starting to set. Alex was freaking out even more now, and was whimpering and breathing heavily. We all started to see shadows move behind the trees, something we all called BS on until it got to the point where we were all seeing it. When it was barely light out, we stopped as we saw the cabin right in front of us. None of us knew what to think. Mike said, "This is bull. I'm going in there." And Alex tried to stop him. We all did. All of us just wanted to go home. Mike said to all of us to piss off and do our own thing. He didn't care anymore. We started to hear hundreds of the same sort of baby doll as before, laughing, whispering, and trying to sing. We started to move forward past the cabin, all of us, and kept pushing forward. We smelled something dead in the air, something stale, the same something as before. We started to hear something crying and something screaming. We just kept going. We eventually crossed the creek and left the woods. Now pitch black, we started the car and began to drive. We were about to get on the 45 to Houston, but the road was under construction and couldn't be accessed. It pointed to a detour. As we headed towards the detour, we found it to be a small, bumpy dirt road going into the woods. We then saw a young girl come up to us. She looked like she was in trouble, young and pretty. She approached the passenger side door. She looked really drugged or beaten up. Alex didn't roll down the windows, nor did he open the door. She reached for the handle and he immediately locked it. She put her face on the window and started to smile really big. We floored it, and Alex started to cry and scream. We were all breathing heavily. We finally cut on a street that took us up to the 45 and took that the whole way home. When we got back to my apartment, no one knew what to say, and we all broke apart and went our separate ways. Mike messaged me later and said he was going to go back. I tried to convince him not to, and all he said was that it was our own minds that were screwing with us. I think he just went to prove to himself that he wasn't scared. I can smell the stench everywhere now. I don't go out anymore. I just stay in and don't answer the door. Last week, everyone I met was acting really strange. People that I knew for a long time, and total strangers. My own dad, when I went to his place to eat supper with him, he just watched me strangely when I was sitting down. He didn't say a word the whole time. I kept asking him, "What's wrong?" He just slowly shook his head. When I was leaving to go home, I turned to wave. He had black eyes and an open mouth like he was in pain. When I started to walk back, he shut the door and bolted it. I stayed there knocking and knocking. Nothing. I called him and his phone was disconnected. I even called the police. Halfway through the questions, the connection started to fade into static. I could hear a faint mumbling, singing, then laughing. Mike is completely vanished. There's not even a record of him being alive. When I call Alex's house, they talk to me like I'm some salesman. They say they don't know any Alex and to please stop calling. The person who tells me that is Alex's mother. I can't get a hold of John. Someone knocked on my door, and when I went to look, I saw a face completely covering the peephole, and a giant smile started to form. I tried calling the cops again. "Sir, are you affected by any drugs at the moment?" "No." "Are you coming home anytime soon?" "Excuse me?" "Come home." The phone call ended. My mail slot swings every now and then. Someone is sliding pieces of baby dolls through it. I try to call people now, and all I can hear is static and baby doll noises, and this crying and screaming. My TV is busted, but when I go to piss, I can hear it on. I might be going insane.